Welcome to Carter's Country Club. This is episode one, A Call to Right Action. This is part five. If we haven't met, my name is Ann Taylor Lashbrook-Wright, and I'm super long-winded, which is why it's taking me forever to go through all of this. So just hang in there, and if you're still here, I'm pretty grateful. Hi. So, hey again. I'm going to do my best to get quickly to these slides so that we can keep moving things forward. I better set myself another little timer to make sure that I keep moving things along. If for some reason you haven't listened to parts one, two, three, and four, you definitely want to go back and listen to those. And the disclaimer that I've made in a few of these videos is that this video is not for children. That's also probably that not for emotionally immature adults that behave like children, but definitely not for any of the children that I teach in swim and gymnastics. Okay, bye. See you all. But if you're here and you're not a child and you're an emotionally mature adult, then we'll keep moving on. Oh, yeah. So as I shared at the end of at the end of part four, Carter went through a lot of balance bikes, and you know, I wouldn't say that I'm a radical unschooler. I'm definitely not, and I wouldn't say that I 100% fall in the unschool camp, but I really do allow him to lead the way. I'm definitely not a radical unschooler in that Carter has a bedtime, Carter doesn't use screens. He does protest taking a bath, and we definitely um, you know, have to be firm that he gets to take a bath. So, shout out to the unschoolers out there, but radical unschooling is definitely not my practice. But things are very child led, and he teaches me all the way, right? I chose these images in this slide because, the balance bike was his jam. And this was the first balance bike. My mom actually found it because we had to find a really, really tiny one, because he was nowhere near close to 2 years old there. He's probably about like 18 months. You can still see his diapers sagging in there, and his little amber necklace and his little baby feet. So we had to find a bike. Carter was fascinated by wheels. He continues to love to make fun of my lack of knowledge of vehicles. But that was him. That was all him. And I'll talk a little bit more about bikes as we go along. Um, but yeah, sleeping is important. It's still important. He still goes to bed super early. He wakes up super early. That's still his jam. And the harmonica down there in the lower right hand corner was not something I thought of. Carter was playing a kazoo, and I was still teaching Pilates at the time. And my high school band director, I was actually not in band, I was big into choir. But my high school band director used to take my classes, and she said, "Oh, if Carter can play the kazoo, you should get him a harmonica." And so I think he has about five. He still jams out on the harmonica. And I hope you can hear him playing here. I think you
Send off the sunset. That's pretty good. Lift it up. There you
can.
go. Oh, nice.
He's going to keep jamming. It's so great. Look at him. We still think it's pretty great. Him
That's
and
for
his
our
music.
Highline buddies.
That's
Gotta
pretty
send off the
good.
sunset.
Yep, he's still jamming. Still going. He says that he knows these songs. Like sometimes when he hears these, he says, "Oh, I still know that song." So, he was doing a lot more with his music than you
Perfect.
see there.
Nice, dude. Give me five. All right.
So, yeah, some of you may have seen these in the past. That was 2018. But thankfully we were right even when it seemed wrong. So this is like the early build out of the van and Carter's, playing there with a gator and Justin was still working, nights at the time. So he would like take this van to work, and then sometimes when he wasn't needed to do his security duties, he would actually sleep in that van. But yeah, I want to keep moving along. Um, I think this shirt is pretty perfect, which he was wearing in that same video, and you can see like it says everything is right, and I really did subscribe to solipsism. I really did think that there was not objective morality. Now I know that to be completely false. But there were things, like I said in the previous slide, that I was right about, even though I was wrong in other areas. So the image in the upper right hand corner there is Carter in my grandmother's house, before he wasn't really welcome, and playing with tractors. He has some of my dad's old tractors still, which is pretty cool. And then the lower right hand corner, Carter he's wearing like little soft soled shoes, and I think we're in Chattanooga there. Um, I know it kind of looks like the gorge because you can see those rotos, but I think it's actually Chat. And he's got one of my old chalk bags on his back, which is actually kind of funny because that is a chalk bag that I'm sure Prana would never make now, and it was a women's specific chalk bag, which is kind of absurd, especially in the wokeness of a company like Prana. It was a little tiny chalk bag, and so like like chalk would always like fall down the back of my pants, and my hands are pretty small, and even then it was still kind of small, but I used it forever, and then it became Carter's, and I don't know if we still have it or if it has gone away, but you know, that's where his movement came from. Yes, I took him to ballet when he was young, and he went to gymnastics, and he was in a forest school and all those things, but really those years of exploring the crags are what gave him that beautiful squat that he's got right there in the picture, and all of the sleeping. If you are waiting for anything in order to live and love without holding back, then you suffer. Every moment is the most important moment of your life. No future time is better than now to let down your guard and love. I haven't read a lot of David Data, but what I have read is incredibly valuable. And it really, kind of led me to my, love of the masculine, which is why there was not a question in my mind that Carter was a boy and he's this strong masculine presence, and I'm really grateful to have the wisdom of the grandfathers and to have my father and the years that I had with my stepdad before he passed away, and to have you know and to be raising Carter with both of us is really really important. Even though, if you had asked Carter when he was little if he climbed, he would say, "No, I ride my bike." Because he spent time like that, just, wandering around the base of the crag while we were climbing. And he really cared nothing about that. He just wanted to play with his trucks and eat dirt, you know. So, yeah, like that was his life. And Carter still loves basketball to this day. And even though he, did a little YMCA basketball league when he was 3, playing basketball at Miguel's, which, if you're unfamiliar, in the Red River Gorge in eastern Kentucky, in Slade, Kentucky to be exact, there is a climber campground and a pizza place called Miguel's. And that's where we lived in our van parked outside of Miguel's, or we parked it at a variety of different places, but we were there. And that's where we spent our time. And it really has informed who Carter is, and it was the right choice for him. And yeah, I want to keep rolling. You've seen bottles in these pictures, and I do want to take a little moment here to express incredible gratitude to all of the women that donated breast milk to Carter. I made some very stupid choices, not because I didn't know any better, but because I doubted myself. I messed around with too much pumping. I didn't listen to my mom, who, just told me just to nurse the baby. My mom had, two natural births with me and my sister, and we were both, breastfed. Yeah, my sister much longer than me. My mom went back to work with me, and so I did have some formula, but my sister was exclusively breastfed. She was a preemie. But Carter had breast milk until he was 2 years old. My supply ran out at about 9 months. I made some formula, like I mentioned in the previous video that I am a big fan of the Weston A. Price Foundation, and so I used raw milk and made a formula until I found donors. And now I think people have to pay for breast milk. There's concerns about whether those people are vaccinated or not. I didn't have those concerns at the time. There was some milk that was labeled that people had taken pharmaceuticals. It was pretty nice that they chose to label that, and I donated that to other moms that weren't concerned about pharmaceutical consumption, but I was. So yeah, and I even, allowed one of my friends to nurse Carter, and I wish I had let her nurse him more. I was definitely being selfish and felt threatened at the time. But Carter had a lot of bottles, and we carried around a lot of breast milk for a long time. This is not the first time that I repelled with Carter. And maybe I could definitely say here that it was not the best choice that I made. But, I never really would back up a rappel or a belay. I've learned a lot from Justin, but when I started climbing in when I was in my late teens, I kind of prided myself on, sort of being unsafe, and just kind of doing whatever. Um, but I didn't feel worried about rappelling with Carter, but now as I look back on that, I'm like, well, probably should have, backed that up. But yeah, that was the last in the upper right hand corner is the last Lashbrook Christmas. And I don't mean to call out any of my family members. I'm really grateful to be a Lashbrook, which is, why Carter and I have this double name because I just couldn't give it up. and, um, and I'm really grateful for my family, and I think most of my family accepts us the way that we are. But there are definitely family members that are incredibly fearful of, you know, Carter's lack of pharmaceutical interventions and vaccines, and it's just a shame. And so, again, that's why I want to keep bringing back to my intention with Carter's Country Club. I feel that there are tons of places that people that choose the mainstream have, but I really want to make sure that people that don't choose the mainstream have a place. People that, don't believe that big pharma is in our best interest. I'm not here to exclude people that think differently, but I really want to support, the quote, unvaccinated, right? The lower right hand corner is the same place that is in the picture of me and Carter rappelling. That is Jackson Falls in southern Illinois. Really, really beautiful place. And like I said, some of these images you may have seen because, this is the year, before I kind of left social media, or maybe it's 2 years before, right? Yeah, it's about 2 years before. But this is another example of not making the right decision. So, this is an area in the Red River Gorge called Emerald City, and it's a route called Ruby Slipper. And I love like thin face climbing, slab climbing, And we thought that it was a good idea to belay in that hammock. And so I took a pretty big fall. Nothing really happened. I just got kind of like a bad, kind of rope burn on my leg. And people, everybody like looked at Carter to see how he would respond, and he just goes, "Miss," He wasn't concerned at all at me taking this. I don't know. I fell from, I don't know, it was probably about 20 feet, not super big fall, but big enough fall. It was much further than it should have been, and, close to decking because we belayed in the hammock. So, again, always learning, but you can see it was the best place for Carter. All the trucks everywhere. And this is also a shout out to all of the people that climbed with us, because when I started taking Carter climbing, many of the people that I had climbed previously with were very much like no kids and dogs at the crag. And I stopped bringing quartz a long time ago, but he still did venture out on some of those trips at the time. But people didn't want to be around kids or dogs, and I totally get the thing about dogs, right? Like, nobody loves my rescue as much as I do, and it gets a little bit annoying when there's dogs everywhere. But the no kids at the crag obviously didn't work anymore. And where in most of my life I really had enjoyed just being with a partner, this was kind of an interesting thing to choose to do, you know, in my, mid 30s, was to try to find this big group of people to climb with so that Carter was safe and so that he was entertained. But that's what we did, I felt like it was the best place for him. And maybe not the best to have large amounts of freeze-dried strawberries, but he still loves some freeze-dried strawberries. They're actually harder to find organic than you think. And we're not perfect. He definitely still has some fruit that's not organic. He actually, the other day or yesterday, he picked some out. He has this really awesome raw yogurt that we got from the Buyers Club in Louisville. Shout out to the Buyers Club. They're great. Got some raw milk and some raw yogurt. But Carter picked his own berries out. And I said, "Dude, those aren't organic." And he goes, "Well, I know. They just looked better." And I was like, "Oh my goodness." So he knows better, but he still gets to make his choices. Right. In 2019, we lived in a van in the Red River Gorge in eastern Kentucky. Quite literally a van down by the river. So these are some of the images of, the build out of the van and, the beginning of that. And it was a good choice. We struggled with different things at the time, and I was not as good at being a dirtbag as Justin, but and definitely not. No one's as good as of a dirtbag as Carter Gray. But it was a really 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 good decision. The Prius still stayed with us. I only retired the Prius, I think, last year. I loved my Prius. It was great. It's definitely done more off-roading than many of your trucks. So, don't make fun of me too much for driving a Prius, because it's been up and down the load hill many times, which is a very very steep incline in the gorge, and I pushed it to its limits, and it almost got to 300,000 miles. So, pretty good place. And this is also an image of a shout out to like minded people. This is Carter and his good friend Charlie Daniels. That is literally his name. He's magical. He's awesome. They're drinking raw milk from Charlie's family farm. And again, I feel that it's okay to share these images because they were shared in social media. And that's his dear friend Amata. They've been together, the beautiful little girl, since they were infants, and they kind of reached for each other when they were very young. So we are really grateful. But I know that there are many other people that don't have a sense of community, right? This is Carter's birthday weekend when he turned 3. And it's just like a perfect example of little crag children just playing at the base of the crag, coloring and being dirty and all of the things. It's really funny. I talk a lot about how people, criticize homeschoolers as though they're not socialized. Carter's just been socialized in a very different way. He hangs out with gentlemen in their late 70s and watches Gunsmoke at the club where I coach in the afternoon. I didn't know he was watching Gunsmoke. He just asked me if I always had a 2:30 swim lesson, and I said, "Well, I do have a 2:30 swim lesson." He said, "Good." I couldn't figure out why that was, but then I realized that on the Western channel in the lobby that he would sit with these retirees and they would watch Gunsmoke and Riflemen. And like I said, he doesn't play with tablets or screens. He didn't watch a movie until he was 5 years old, and we've been pretty selective. But Carter selected his own choice of watching westerns, and definitely the child led there. But we decided that was probably the best. If he was going to watch some TV, that was probably a pretty decent choice. Yep, this was our life, right? Like dirty child, breast milk out of a bottle, the kid carrying backpack that he eventually broke. I wish we had put him in a excuse me, not a harmonica, in a hammock sooner. I didn't have him sleep in the hammock. I would just like hold him, or he would like fall asleep in the kid carrier. The image up there, you can still see Quartz. That's when Quartz is, you can see his little bottom in the upper right hand corner when Quartz still got to go climbing. I just put my shoes there as like a reference because I had taken a picture of Carter. The first day he went out climbing, he was 8 days old, and I had a picture by some shoes, and so I took this other picture. He didn't really sleep too well on the bouldering pad. He was definitely like, you know, I'd hold him or somebody would hold him. But I wish I'd done the hammock earlier. So if you are choosing to raise your child like a crag baby, think about the hammocks. It would be a good choice. And yeah, I don't necessarily know why I chose these photos other than Justin took them and they were kind of cool. My hair is like so super long and needs a haircut here. But, you know, it was a really good choice. Now these images are from a day where I think it's pretty important to share. It was only supposedly women that were on this little climbing trip, except Carter. He got to be included. And a friend at the time had taken all of these images of him. And this was Carter's kind of first experience around like a trans person. And I didn't even realize that this person was trans. And I really had never interacted with somebody that had had top surgery and had done all of those things. And so those are like the conversations that you didn't think you would have to have. And we didn't have that conversation at the time, but when the world was changing and when we started to see more trans people, I got to kind of make this reference of like, oh, you did have a friend that was trans and you did have this around you. And and so I say that because, I feel people have criticized me making, assumptions. And I have no issue with adults making whatever choices they're making. It's the grooming of children that I will not get behind. And I do not support big pharma and I do not support surgeries. And so I'd love to have those conversations because, like I said, I shared this in the last one, I really, really get it. But where this comes into Carter's Country Club is I want to make sure that people have a place that don't want to take part in the trans agenda. Carter was climbing at a gym for a while, and they approached us about, competing in USA Climbing. And I said, well, I can't really support USA Climbing, not because it's not fair to Carter, but because as a female athlete, I would not want to compete against biological men. Or if I was younger, I wouldn't want to compete against biological boys. I do not think that that is fair. And I really think that they could have their own, category or space, just like, not that it's equated to like the Special Olympics, but, they are altered. They're taking hormones in some cases. And so, or other types of pharmaceuticals. So I feel that they need their own category. And so I want to make sure that Carter's Country Club and people involved are very clear on natural law of gender, that there are two biological genders, and that we are not talking about sex education with children. I believe that's a conversation with the family. My son is homeschooled. He's not going to go to a governmental institution of a school. So the school is not going to have sex ed conversations with him. And so I don't want to support that. I don't support him using what I feel are improper pronouns. I support him in calling people by their names. So he had a little girl that he was in Nutcracker with, and they referred to her as he. And so I encouraged Carter to call her by her name, and to be a good friend and supportive, but we don't engage in the pronoun conversations. So I'm going to read this next little statement, and then that'll kind of tee up part six. But we're getting close to the end here of our time for part five. All my fears became. Oh, I can't really read this. Let's see if I can close out. Yeah, I can close out the navigator. There we go. In 2020, all my fears became true. Yes, everything I had been avoiding thinking was really happening. And slowly the truth became super clear. I knew that the wisest people I know and thinkers I have studied were right. There was a lot of confusion for me during this time as I began to really sort out and sort through mind control, but I was guided. I always have been. I listened to sources and read authors I had never expected to read. The truth that Aaron Russo's wife had shared with me in 2005 became very real. So I'm going to get more into this in part six, but I tell you this because, as I've mentioned, actually interacting in person with a trans person who had been through top surgery, I am speaking about lived experience that I experienced. I watched Aaron Russo's documentary, Freedom to Fascism, because it was handed to me by his wife. I was teaching a Pilates class. She felt the need to share that with me. And so I was exposed in person. Just like the first time I met a flat earther was not, through something online. I listened to him as I would listen to all kinds of people because he came into my life. And that was in, I think, 2017 or 2018. Um, and again, I'm not here to debate these things. I think that we get to keep coming back to the focus of the children, right? So, fear is perception, false emotion appearing real, and fear is the currency of control. And it's a great book if you haven't read it, Perceptions of a Renegade Mind by David Icke. And this is where I'm going to leave part five with Carter in 2020 looking off into the distance. and the fact that this is our lived experience. And I want to share our lived experience, not something that I went down a rabbit hole searching just because YouTube told me to. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you in part 6.